When you are designing an application or architecting it, so important quality to consider is error handling. See, we can never probably design a software architecture, software solution that is 100% error free. No, I don't think that's going to happen ever. So you can devise a robust application, and you can still expect some fault somewhere, something fails. Could be because of a hardware failure. Now, see, although we can never design a solution that is 100% error free, what is important is how do you handle an error, right? So we have to consider that aspect of design while architecting your solution. How is error handling is incorporated into your solution architecture, right? So now, what is error handling all about? It is simple. So when, let's say, you have a function, right? Let us begin with a function. So you have a function that takes integers, and now while it is seeking for integers, the user entered a real value, a float value, double value, or character value, which is not expected. Now, how do you deal with it, right? So that is about error handling. Now, you receive float data. Are you able to detect it that, okay, this is not integer data, and written saying that, okay, I cannot deal with real data, I cannot deal with double data, so please enter integer. What are you doing here? You are actually handling an error case, isn't it? So your application or your function is expecting integer, but the user enters non-integer value. What are you supposed to do as an application developer? That you cannot accept that, handle that case and return. So what happens if you don't handle it? If you don't handle it, right, you deal with that data which your data types cannot hold, and therefore you give inconsistent results, you give unexpected output, which is even more catastrophic than handling an error. So yeah, if you handle an error, what happens? The user may be frustrated, but that's good for him, that you are letting him know that what kind of data is expected here, right? So error handling is about you talking about situations where a program or system fails to properly handle errors. Now, how would these happen, right? Error handling. Why would these happen, or how would these introduce into your design and code? So one of them is incomplete error handling code. So you may forget, or you may miss that type of handling an error. So you have an incomplete error handling code. So that could be one reason why error handling is introduced into your error handling failure is introduced into your application. And then another aspect is designing. So while designing your application itself, you couldn't anticipate that error coming in, and therefore your design could not handle that error. So that is poorly designed error handling. Not only incomplete error handling code, but poorly designed error handling is also the culprit for error handling failures. And the third one is lack of testing. See, you could have found it and informed the architect or informed the developer that this particular piece is not handling errors by testing it thoroughly. So testing it for error handling failures is another reason. So the lack of testing for error handling failures is another reason why the error handling failures come into your code and application. The next one is you should make sure as a developer or QA engineer that there is sufficient error handling reporting. So you note down the cases, right? A, B, C, and these cases are given incorrect input. Are we handling the errors or not? Right? And then sometimes you just ignore some of the errors, so you don't handle them at all. That is, say, let's say one application, you are dealing with a third-party application. Your code talks to third-party application, and third-party application returns you error code 80, 81, 82. Now you handled all three, well and good. Now the third-party application has released a newer version where they also introduced a new error code 83. Okay. Now, so as your product, your application, you don't have error handling for that. So that is also one reason why error handling failure happens. Now, what is the impact of error handling failures? So error handling failure could lead to a compromise of sensitive data. See, when you do not gracefully handle the error, you do not know what you throw as an output. You could throw your complete stack frame as an output, or you could throw some sensitive information as like your username, password, or username, credit card, or any other sensitive information. So because that is not controlled by you, that particular error you have not handled. And now what is the parameter that is coming and what structure it is or what object it is, so what is inside it, you are not sure about it. So therefore, the compromise of sensitive data is one of the impacts of error handling failures. And the next one is disruption of services. Yes, so that is denial of services is bound to happen. I myself have experienced this in industry, that when you do not handle errors appropriately or completely, the denial of service is bound to happen. You see, in the case of example, you are relying on a third party, and third party is returning some error code which you didn't handle. So if you didn't handle, what happened? So you continue to operate, right? Your application is continue to run because you didn't know that 83 error happened at the third party product or third party application. Whereas the system might have gone down the third party. So you think you are accepting the request, and yet you don't get any response from third party. So that is a denial of service, is another impact of error handling failures. And the next one is regulatory compliance issues. Yes, so organizations that fail to handle when they leak sensitive data or when they report unwanted information, that is a compliance or regulatory breaches. So you will be bound to regulations by your government, and if you violate them, then you are fined with a huge amount of money. How do you mitigate them, and what are the best practices to minimize these error handling failures? Or when you design your application or when you code your application, what do? Implement proper error handling and exception handling mechanisms, right? So make sure your team members are well equipped, or you are well equipped with exception handling of the programming language that you are using. How to handle the known errors, how to handle the unknown errors. Right? So if you take a look at try catch block, so anything that you are expecting an error, you put it inside a try block, and catch exceptions. So if you know the exception name, handle it. If you don't know, right, leave it to the unknown exception handling, that catch exception that can handle any other error. Right? So that is one way you can mitigate it. And user input validation, that's the most important thing that you are bound to do, whether you are designing a small application, big application, because if lack of user input validation introduces many other security vulnerabilities into your code. And use strong authentication and authorization. Right? All right, so some error could not be handled, but yet if it is in the hands of authenticated and authorized users, your impact is going to be less. Right? So that is one of the best practices. And then use encryption and access controls. Yes, use encryption. So even if you dump the data, right, so if it is encrypted, the sensitive data is not leaked. Next is test your code thoroughly. Right? So devise a mechanism for error handling failure. So write a piece of automation that tests exclusively for error handlings. And implement monitoring and logging mechanism. Right? If you couldn't handle error, log appropriately, so that you have some amount of information, okay, where something went wrong. As a developer, you need to debug. As a developer, you need to handle that. So in case, let's say in the previous example, 83 is written, you couldn't handle it. So at least print a log message saying that unknown or unexpected error code 83 is written. Then you would go ahead and debug, okay, why did this come? Right? Then you would enhance your code to handle that new error code. And the next one is regularly review and update your code. So whenever you are making a new release or adding a new patch, so make sure you review the code around it, and is all good enough, right? Is all errors handled now, or do we need to introduce any new error handling code?